editing Keely, and before we get into this video, I did want to say a couple things. One, after I filmed it last night, I was thinking to myself and I was like, damn it. We're probably doing exactly what he was hoping for as someone that works in marketing. We are driving ourselves to look at his website when previously we never would have. So we're giving him the clicks that he's looking for. And he's also making himself more visible in communities that he may not have otherwise been in, because now I'm talking about him, other people are talking about him. I talked about him to my husband, so his whole thing of working in marketing and getting his name out there absolutely works. So I just want to acknowledge that I totally understand now that I'm feeding into the narrative that he's putting out there of trying to write things that are a little bit controversial and get people to go to his website and to talk about him. I fell for it. I get it. But I still think there's some important conversations to be had based on the things that he wrote, whether or not he fully agrees with them or not. The second thing that I wanted to say is I reference a lot throughout this video his level of privilege as a white man. And I just want to say I also have a level of privilege as a white woman in the United States. I recognize that. I know that. So I may not have explicitly said that I also have a level of privilege, but I'm trying hard to acknowledge that he's not talking about the fact that he has privilege, but I also didn't talk about the fact that I have a lot of the same privileges, not as much as he does as a man, but I do have a lot. I have access to books, I have access to bookstores and libraries and safe places to keep them and all of that. I recognize that I have that level of privilege. So I just wanted to make sure that there was no people wondering if I thought that I didn't have. I 100% have a lot of privilege as a white woman in the United States. I just want to say that. Okay, let's get into the video. Hi world, it's Keely and I am back for another video. I wanted to do something a little bit different today. I typically don't really do videos like this, but this one was just really interesting and I thought I would go for it. So this video is going to be me reviewing Ryan Holiday's 2026 reading rules. Is that what he's calling them? Yeah, reading rules. I had no idea who he was before I watched Dee Dee over at Brown Girl Reading talk about his reading rules and respond to them. And then I was like, I have some thoughts. So I figured I would share them because why not? Ryan Holiday is a marketing professional. He's an author. I think he runs a bookstore. He's got 1 million followers on Instagram. Like, he's got a really big following. Our circles just never intersect in terms of like his content and what I consume. So I've never absorbed any of his content. I've never read any of his books. I don't really know anything about him other than what I could quickly glean from his website. This is a post that he made recently, a blog post that is his reading rules for 2026. Now, these are things that he applies to himself, which is 100% fine. Anyone can give themselves any kind of rules or goals or anything that they want to guide their reading throughout the year. That's fine. People do that. I do that. Everyone does that on BookTube. We all have some kind of goal that we're doing, even if our goal is to not have any active goals. That's totally fine. He then goes on to say, he says, these 31 rules by no means make a complete list. It's 31, which is a lot. 31 rules by no means make a complete list, but if you implement even a couple of them, I'm comfortable guaranteeing you'll not only be a better reader for it, but a better person too. That's quite the claim. I don't necessarily agree with that, but also because that's so subjective. And what it means to be a better reader or a better person, it all depends on context. Putting that out there that I think it's pretty subjective, but if you apply these and you then judge yourself to be a better reader or a better person because of implementing these, cool. That's awesome for you. Happy for you. I'm just going to take you through all of them. They will be linked down below. His website will be, and I'm just going to tell you whether or not I agree with them and think that they are things that I would recommend myself as someone that has been a reader for my entire life and also had to do a lot of reading academically through undergrad and graduate school, and then in my career for the last 12 years of working in social services. The first one says, it is not enough that you read. You have to read well. You have to read the right books. You have to figure out how to process and retain and, of course, apply what you read. Okay. Surface value or surface level, sure, I agree with that. It's not enough that you read, you have to read the right books. Well, That's subjective as well. Also, so is saying you have to read well. What does that mean? If you're reading for pleasure and something is bringing you joy, then I would say that you're reading well. If you're reading to learn something and you're reading academically, or you're reading historical works or something, and you're learning, I would say you're reading well. What does that mean? That completely depends on the person, the context, what you're hoping to achieve, all of that. It also says you have to read the right books. Well, again, what does that mean? What is your goal in reading? If you just want something to zone out and bring you joy so you don't have to focus on like the hellscape that is life, I would say that that's the right book for you. Now, if you're looking for something like you're specifically trying to learn something, then sure, I would say that there are like right books and wrong books. Right books being books written by the people that do that thing, that created that thing, that are doing the research on that thing. Sure, those could potentially be the right books, but the right books are also people writing about viewpoints that oppose that, or that are challenging that, or critiquing that. So again, you have to read the right books. What does that mean? That's subjective for every person. The second one is you should always be carrying a book. I like this idea, again, in theory. I like the idea of constantly having books with you. I have multiple reading apps on my phone, so at any given time, I do actually have books with you. But this is not applicable to all people. I think it's wonderful if you have the ability to physically carry a book with you, or to have the financial means to have a device that has reading apps on it, or have an e-reader, things like that. I think that's great. I wish that everyone could have that, or some way of absorbing book content in a way that works for you, whether that's audiobooks or ebooks or physical books. Again, I love that. I love this idea in theory, but I think if you're someone that doesn't do that or can't do that, it doesn't mean that you're any less of a reader than the people that can. I think it's, again, depends on context, depends on financial means, depends on access, all kinds of things. We're gonna give that one a sure, kinda. The third one is if you're not reading with a pen, you're not really reading. Again, kinda, not really. It depends again on why you're reading to begin with, like why you're reading the thing. When I read nonfiction, a lot of times I do write all over it because I'm trying to learn something from the nonfiction. But sometimes I also read nonfiction that I don't really care about, like in terms of really critiquing it. I'm just reading it so I can, experience someone else's story, or so I can get the beginnings of a topic. I have a book that was written about dinosaurs, and as much as I really enjoyed reading that, I was reading it just to enjoy it in the moment and make my way through it and read about something that I don't typically read about, not something that I'm necessarily trying to critique or like grind into my brain. So therefore, I wouldn't take notes on it. I wouldn't write all over it. Also, again, looking at if people have the physical ability to hold a pen and write. Some people don't, and that's okay. It doesn't make them any less of a reader, any less of a serious reader, serious consumer of literature if they don't have the ability to physically hold a pen and write. Also, some people are only able to read if they go to the library and use library books, which you can't write on. I think, again, and potentially that person could take notes separately if they wanted to. I definitely have. But again, all of these things are so like context based that I don't want people to read this and think like, oh, if I don't do this thing how he says it, I am not a good reader or a good person, which apparently is one of the things he's working towards. I don't know. I just think, like, again, the next one is books are not precious things. It should look like you've read the book. Mark it up, fold pages, beat them up. First of all, books are expensive. Second of all, books could have some kind of meaning for you, and you would want that book to potentially look a certain way in order to preserve the experience that you have associated with that book. That doesn't mean that you're not reading it or enjoying it or a lover of that book if you're not destroying it while you're reading it. I remember years ago on BookTube, there was a lot of back and forth on whether or not you should break the spine of a book. There's people that are hardcore, snap the spine the second they open it, and there's other people that will go out of their way to not do anything to the edges of the book. Both are valid. Both don't disqualify, the other side from being a good reader or from absorbing literature or anything like that. It completely depends. Again, Books are also expensive too. If you want it to last for a long time, if you want it to hold up, itself, and the pages not fall out, maybe don't beat the shit out of your books. Or maybe that's the thing that you like about your books. You like them looking like you've read them. Both are fine. Also, if you don't have access to be able to keep books physically for yourself and you have to use library books, don't beat them up. Other people are also using them, and you don't want to get a book that's falling apart. You want it to be able to be shared with other people and go back into library circulation. So I think this idea of like books are not precious things, that's a little for me. I can kind of see that for him, he's always had access to books. Again, guessing, I don't know, but always had access to books or has access to books in a way that a lot of people don't because books cost money. You have to have a place to store them. A lot of people don't, but that doesn't mean that you're, not still getting a good experience from the books. I don't like this idea of saying that books are just whatever. Like, no, books have a lot of meaning to a lot of people, and the idea of access to books and being able to read is something that has historically been used as a system of oppression and like preventing people from being able to learn how to read. So books are incredibly precious things, and I think however you decide to treat your books is again individualized to you and the values that you have associated with books. And I just think that this is such like a flippant, like not taking into the context of the racialization of reading and all of that. And I don't know, surface value, sure, you don't have to think that books are precious things. Or other side, you can think books are precious things, and part of that is that it looks like you've read it and enjoyed it, and because you can see that you've read it and it's had some wear on it, that means more to you, and therefore it is a precious item. So I don't agree with this one. The next one is spilling food on a book is a sign of respect. Some of my best meals of my life occurred over a book, and the stains prove it. No. Again, no. If you're not getting your books dirty, if you're not spilling food on them, it doesn't mean that it's not a good book or that you didn't enjoy it or get a lot out of it. Again, this concept of what books mean to different people. If you are someone that wants your book to look lived in and you want to remember that, like, yes, I got food on it, but I remember what I was eating while I was reading that book and it's a whole vibe, sure. I mean, I do that with recipes that I print out. The more disgusting a physical piece of paper that is a recipe looks, the more I know that I like that recipe and I've used it a billion times. Eventually I'll have to reprint it. But I don't do that with my books. I don't want my books to get wet. I don't want the writing to be all smudgy and gross. I hate it when I get books from the library or thrift books and they have like shit on them. Like, no, I don't want that. I think this is a perfectly fine one for him and something that is fine for him. But again, it's kind of showing a level of privilege where he has access to books, to buy his own books, to damage his own books, and then know that if it gets damaged enough, he can just replace it and it's not a big deal. And I just, your privilege is showing, my guy. The next one is forget the news. The best way to understand what's happening in the world is by reading books, usually old books. Yes and no. Now, I would agree that getting all of your information about the world from the news is not necessarily the best way to do it, because the news, they're telling a specific story, they're framing it for a specific narrative. There's always some kind of motivation behind what any news source is telling you, and it might not match with your view of the world. It might not match with your experience of the world. I think if you take things at face value with, like, when it comes to news, you're gonna miss out on a lot of stuff, because each news source, whether they're telling accurate news or not, is only telling one specific part of the story. You're not getting the whole context. So in that case, I agree. I think people should be reading more books and should be learning more. It's definitely what I am doing, because I know that the news sources that I am exposed to as a white American citizen are very different than what is happening in the rest of the world, even within the country. I want to make sure that I am not following just that narrative that is very purposeful in what they're saying and not saying and how they're saying it. So I think it is important to read from other perspectives. Now, saying that usually old books are the way to go, Again, not necessarily. Just because a book is old doesn't mean that it's accurate, doesn't mean that it's trauma-informed, victim-centered, intersectional, like anti-racist, or, you know, wonderful for people with disabilities, wonderful for trans people. You know, I think that if you're looking at a specific thing, you're trying to learn a specific topic, there might be books written on that topic that it's good to read to have the historical context of like how the field has changed over time or how that thing was discovered back when it was discovered, you know, be able to build on that knowledge. But if you're just relying on old books on a topic because they're old, you're gonna get a lot of white men with really shitty views of the world. Now, the next one I do completely agree with. The next one is a lot of people read, but not enough people reread. I would agree with that for myself. I don't actually know how many people reread books because I don't pay attention to that. I don't give a shit if you reread your books or not. For myself, yes, I absolutely am someone that does not really reread books. I have in the last year reread a couple books and I've really enjoyed it, but it's not something that I have typically done in the past, and that has definitely come from this motivation to consume more, to read more, to constantly be reading the next thing, and feeling like if I'm rereading a book, I'm wasting time that I could spend reading something new. And that's something I'm working on for myself, so I will say that I agree with that one specifically for me, and I would definitely, you know, push a little bit for if there are other people out there that want to reread a book but feel like they shouldn't because they want to keep up with like all the other new books. Try to get rid of that vibe for a little bit and just reread a book that you enjoyed. Or, you know, if book 2 of a series finally came out and you don't remember shit but you really want to, you know, continue that series, go ahead and reread the first one. Give yourself permission to reread it. The next one I also really agree with, and that is that rereading is the best way to get out of a reading slump or a dry spell. I have done this many times over the last couple of years, so I guess I actually have reread more than I thought. I have definitely done this where I've been in a mood where like I just don't want anything new. I don't want the stress or the pressure or the emotions that come with consuming new content when you don't know what's going to happen, because my own mental health and the world has been too uneasy and too like, we don't know what's going to happen next. And it sets off my hypervigilance and I don't like it. So that's why I rewatched British Bake Off a billion times, even though I've seen it a billion times, because I know who's going to win. It's why I play the same video games over and over, because I know the outcome. I know that it's comfortable. And it's also why I've started rereading books. So within the last couple of years, I completely reread the Murderbot Diaries series because it's one of my favorites and I knew I was going to love it. I reread the first book in the Greta Helsing series and ended up just binging through the entire series afterwards because it was so comfortable. I reread the Others series by Anne Bishop, and those are all, you know, chunky urban fantasy books, but because I knew like the vibes I was gonna get, I knew the feelings I was gonna get, that was much safer than exposing myself to new content which was gonna potentially cause emotions that I didn't want to feel because I was already feeling so much everywhere else. So I will definitely say that rereading is a huge comfort for a lot of people. It's definitely something I recommend if you're in a reading slump, to pick up something that you know you love, even if you just read it last month, who gives a shit? Just reread it and have a good time, and hopefully it will kick off you being able to read new books and try new things when you are ready to. The next one is don't be a book snob. Next one is never read without taking extracts, and this is capture any quotes, stories, ideas, and observations that strike you. And then he goes on to talk about how he keeps a commonplace book, which is a very popular type of journaling where it's like a notebook that you carry with you. I've seen them as like little tiny ones, and then I've seen them as bigger ones, and it's basically you just keep this notebook with you at all times so you can write down anything that you think of, you can doodle, you know, whatever. You just always have something with you to write on. I don't think this is necessary. This idea of never reading without taking, you know, writing quotes or something like that. For a lot of people, I know that that's a really popular thing, especially annotating your books, tabbing them. I do that with nonfiction where I will tab stuff or write all over them, or sometimes I'll write the quotes in like a separate notebook, especially if I got a book from the library. But like solid 90% of my reading, I don't because I'm just trying to enjoy the vibes. And if I stop to, you know, either get a pen or something to write on my book, or if I am looking for a highlighter, or even to like stop and highlight something on my Kindle, that breaks my flow of reading. Or sometimes I'm like falling asleep and I'm like, oh, that was cool anyway, and then just like go on to the next thing. So I think if remembering quotes and annotating books and stuff is something that really works for you and you really like doing it, if you like making your books more immersive a lot of the time, that's cool. I think you should totally do that. But I don't necessarily think that it's something that you need to do for all or even half of your books. It all, again, depends on what you're hoping to get out of the book that you're reading. If you want to write all over Ice Planet Barbarians and quote stuff and stuff, then more power to you. Please do it. But I don't think it's necessarily something that everyone needs to start doing. Now, I do agree with the next one. The next one says if a book sucks, stop reading it. I absolutely agree with this. I think that there's definitely this push that I've seen from a lot of people on BookTube where they think they need to finish every book they read regardless of if they're enjoying it or not. I think that's dumb. I don't think you should do that unless it's a book that you're like required to read for school or for your job or for something. But if you're not enjoying it, why are you wasting your time on that book? Like, there's billions of other books. Go pick something else. Try again. I think that, you know, I've definitely heard a lot of people on BookTube for their goals for this year of like learning how to DNF and put down books. And I think that's such a powerful thing to be able to say, like, this book is not fitting what I need right now. It's not meeting my needs. It's not writing people in a respectful way. It's characters I don't give a shit about. You know, I hate this thing that this author is doing. You know, I think that right now everyone should be trying as much as they can to find joy in where they can get it. And if a book is not bringing you joy, if it's not something that you are going to in order to, you know, get something out of it, you know, like a good thing, then I think maybe you should consider not reading it. But it, again, caveats left and right here that it depends on why you're reading it. If it's something that you're reading to learn, if it's something you're reading for work or for school or for whatever, then you might not be able to just, you know, stop reading it completely. You might have to push through. But if you're reading like a fantasy novel just for funsies and you're not liking it, stop reading it. There's a billion other ones out there. I definitely am someone that will push through really tough nonfiction, even if I'm not necessarily enjoying it, because it's a really difficult topic, not because it's like poorly written or misogynistic or racist or anything like that, but just because it's a really tough topic and it's emotional. So I might read it slower, but I'm not going to DNF it. But again, it's because I'm hoping to get something out of it. That's not the case with fantasy. I've DNF'd plenty of fantasy because they're written by people that are writing about other people that doesn't fit their worldview or their experience of the world, and they're getting it wrong. And so I don't want to waste my time with that. The next one is pretty interesting. I've never heard this, and I think this might be very helpful for some people. This one is the rule for quitting books is 100 pages minus your age. And that's really just a way for you to determine how many pages you're going to read in order to give a book a solid chance. For me, I do 50 pages. If I'm not feeling it in the first 50 pages, I'm done with it. It could be I'm done with it completely. It could be I'm done with it for right now. Maybe it's just not fitting the mood that I'm in, and I know if I read it right now, I'm not going to have a good time. I'm going to put myself in a reading slump, in which case I'll come back to it later. I do that all the time. I am notorious for starting like 15 books at the same time, focusing on the ones I'm really enjoying, forgetting everything I read from the 14th book, and then putting it down and going back to it like a year later, and then I really love it. I think that, you know, giving yourself that kind of, okay, I'm going to try for 50 pages, or I'm going to try for however many pages, and if I'm not into it, I'm going to say that it's okay to put it down, whether for right now or permanently, I think is a good thing that more people should try doing. But again, it depends on what you're getting from the book. If in the first 10 pages you're reading something horrible and you're like, absolutely not, what the hell, how did this get published, how did this get through editing, don't push yourself. If you know from the start that you hate it, don't go on with it. Like, don't do that. I've done that with so many books. I won't name it, but there's a fantasy series that was written in the last few years that within the first like 20 pages, every female character that the male character was introduced to was sexually assaulted, and it was used as a plot point to show us how heroic he was for getting upset about it. And that was disgusting, and I'm not going to engage with that content. And so I immediately DNF'd it. I told everyone that I know in my personal life about it and was like, hard pass on this book, because what the hell is that? So I think it just depends on like again, your own, what you're looking for in books, the things that are going to be like a hard, oh my God, no, versus things you could potentially push through and just kind of see how it plays out. There are definitely like twists and turns that books take where you're like, oh my God, I hate that decision. I don't want to read that, but you'll finish the book because like you're still enjoying it to some extent. I just had that with a book I read over the weekend where I hated the main character. I thought she was a shit ass person. The decisions that she was making was terrible, but the vibes and the setting and the plot around her was really interesting, so I didn't DNF it when previously I would have DNF'd it. The next one is good writers and good books are not hard to read. Incorrect. I think it depends, again, what you are hoping to get out of something and who the audience is for that thing. Now, I will say, this is a problem that kind of exists in academics, in STEM, in most fields, where we get so wrapped up in our own heads, in our own jargon, that we suck at explaining things to people that do not do that thing or were not trained for that thing. That's a big thing that I work on with my supervisor and my team, is taking the concepts and the material from the field that I work in and making it palatable to the average person who has not spent 5+ years in, you know, higher education and grad school, because we don't want to miss out on people. We want people to have this information, but it comes down to us being able to understand the topic well enough to be able to explain it to someone who has no idea. Now, some stuff is not gonna, that's just not gonna work. This reminds me of Chernobyl, the show. If anyone has watched the TV show Chernobyl, we've seen it many, many times. It's one of my husband's favorite shows ever. So I've watched it a billion times. There's a scene where, I had to look it up, Stellan Skarsgård is talking to Jared Harris, and Jared Harris is the scientist and Stellan Skarsgård works for the government, and Stellan Skarsgård doesn't want Jared Harris's character to be with him at all. He thinks that Jared Harris's character is kind of overdoing it, that it's not that bad, all of that. He looks at Jared Harris and he basically says, like, he flat out says, like, explain nuclear reactors to me. And Jared Harris is like, what? he's like, yeah, explain it to me. And so Jared Harris has to, in that moment, come up with a way to simplify as much as he can this incredibly complex process and explain it to someone with no experience. And it's so funny because at the end, Stellan Skarsgård goes, okay, now I understand it. No, you don't. That's just such a perfect example of how you can break something down as much as possible and it's just not gonna work the way that the other person wants it to. But I think that it is important for people that work in any specific field to try to understand something well enough to be able to explain it in simpler terms for people that don't have that background knowledge, that training to understand with the jargon that you're using. So to say that good books and good writers are not hard to read, incorrect. Again, it depends on what you're trying to get across. I think I get what he's saying, that you should be able to pick up any book and be able to understand it, but that's just not the case. That's not how it works for a lot of books. Now, if it's a book that's like fantasy or something, I can't tell you how many high fantasy I read where I have no clue what the hell's going on for the first like 200 pages of like a 600-page book. And it doesn't mean that the person is not a good writer or that it's not a good story or a good book. It means that it's really complex and it's gonna take time. So I don't think that this like surface level that we can say, you know, across the board in order for everyone to understand it from the get-go, that's what makes a good writer. I don't think that's the case. I think it really depends on the context and the purpose for the writing. There are definitely books where, and journal articles for sure, academic journal articles where I read them, I'm like, you really picked up a thesaurus and tried your hardest. And other ones where I'm like, no, that was easier to read. But the next one I agree with. The next one says a long book must justify itself. Yes. He's basically saying if a book is going to be 1,000 pages, it needs to be worth having 1,000 pages. I absolutely agree with this. I have read long ass books where you seriously could have cut out a third of that book and you would have had the same story. You would have had the same experience. If I'm going to devote my time to a long ass book, really, take the time and months or however to read something that's super long, it needs to be worth it to me in the end. Now, again, that's subjective. So I read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke a couple years ago. It was super duper long. I loved being in that environment. I had a bomb-ass time reading it. I really loved how long it was and how long I spent in that universe. But I've heard people that really thought that that book could have been edited down and that it didn't need to be that long. So there's a perfect example of it being completely subjective. I made it through The Crimson Petal and the White by Michelle Faber years ago with my sister. Long ass book. It took us a long time to get through. But because I read it with my sister, I had a really good time spending that amount of time with those characters in that book and in that world. I know a lot of people that hate that book, so this is subjective. For me, I agree that a long-ass book needs to be worth it, but it needs to be worth it for my criteria and what I'm trying to get out of it in that moment. Sometimes I just want to be in a long book, and it doesn't really matter if I think the whole thing was worth it in the end, because I just want to be in that book and see the physical progress of my bookmark working its way through the book. And other times I don't, and I want to read a bunch of stories that are under 300 pages and just move on to the next one. So for me, I'm going to say yes to this one, but I think it's subjective. The next one is to ask the question, what's a book that changed your life? I kind of agree with this one. I think that it's really interesting to ask someone that question and let them determine what that means for them and give you a recommendation for a book that they just really, really liked. It doesn't have to be any kind of specific book. I'm noticing my hair is kind of crazy. It doesn't have to be like a big philosophical work. It doesn't need to be a nonfiction book. It can be, you know, anything. But I do think that's a really interesting question to ask people. I think it's also important to recognize that there are some people that will not be able to give you a book that had a significant meaning in their life, and that's okay too. I think that for a lot of people, if you ask them and they don't have one, you could ask, okay, what's a movie, what's a TV show, what's a song, what's a band, what's an experience. I just think this idea of like asking people for something really important to them that they would be willing to share with you can make a relationship stronger and tell you a lot about that person. So if the person does have a book that they would want to share with you, I think that's great, but I don't think it's necessarily any better or worse than the person who says, well, actually, I don't have a book, but I have a cartoon, or I have a movie, or I have a conversation, I have a person that I met, I have an experience, things like that. So yes and no for this one. The next one I don't agree with. The next one is cool titles usually make for crappy books. I don't think so, because again, I think this is subjective, and I think it depends on what you define as cool. I was trying to think of a book for this one, and Night of the Living Rez is a amazing book. I had such a great time reading that collection of short stories that are indigenous and kind of horror leaning. And Night of the Living Rez is a great title because it's like Night of the Living Dead, which is a zombie movie. And as a horror movie fan, I love that. I also have another collection that I need to read that's called Night of the Living Queers. I love that shit. I love books that are like quirky and have ridiculous titles. This one from the library that I'm reading, this one is called Being Human, and her last name is Heumann, and she was a disability rights activist, and so a lot of what she's writing about is this concept of being dehumanized and not being considered a human because of her disability, but her last name is Heumann, so the book is called Being Human. I think that's quirky and cool, and I don't think that that makes it a bad book. So I think, again, a lot of these are like super duper subjective, but I don't think that cool titles make for crappy books. Crappy titles can make for crappy books. So I think crappy writing can make for crappy books. You can come up with a really cool title and your book can still be shit, or you can come up with a really dull title and your book can still be shit. So I think this one is subjective. The next one is interesting. This one is don't judge a book by its cover, but also you kind of should, especially newer books. Now, okay. There are definitely, you can see trends in publishing at any given time by which books are being published and what they look like. That's why there's such like a joke about if you go to a librarian or a bookseller and you say, I can't remember the title, but the cover's red with a flower on it. You're going to get 8 billion books that are red with a flower on it. So you're going to need to be a little bit more specific, especially if you're like looking for a YA fantasy in the last 10 years. It's going to be the blank of blank and blank. Like, you know, there are these trends that come through. So I think sometimes you can judge a book by its cover and be like, oh my God, that looks stupid and I don't want to read that, or oh my god, that looks amazing and I really want to read that. So I think sometimes it is fun to kind of judge books by their cover. But it's what he says after that kind of pisses me off. This says it tells you something about the author, it tells you something about the leverage they had with their publisher, it tells you who they think will like this book. I see what he's saying, because a lot of times from what I've read about publishing, now he's a published author, he runs a bookstore, he knows more about publishing than I do. I will happily admit that publishing is not my field. But I also know that publishing is notoriously and historically very white. And I think saying that, well, if a cover looks like shit or it looks like every other cover out there, then that's indicative of the sway that the author had with their publisher. And I think, okay, take it at face value, sure, maybe it indicates to you that maybe that author is white, maybe that author is privileged, maybe that author got published because of their name and not because of any inherent talent that they had at writing. Sure, maybe it also tells you the opposite. Maybe it also tells you that this is an author that the only way they could get their book published was to agree to this shitty cover that they didn't want to do, but it was a way to get them published and to hopefully make them some income for their work, because self-publishing, while it's a thing, it also requires a certain amount of access to things, to technologies, and to systems and finances that some people don't have. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't be published. So I just think this is a more nuanced conversation than what he typed out at face value, and I wish that there was more of a conversation around that. Maybe he's written stuff about that in other blog posts, I don't know. It seems like he's been around for a while, so it's possible. But I just think for people that don't have any context coming into this, reading and thinking like, oh, if they got their own flashy cover, they must have a lot of sway. I don't know that that necessarily tells you the full story. So as a social worker, I'm gonna call BS on this one at surface level. The next one is gonna be, again, it depends. So this one is look for wisdom, not facts. So when you're reading, what are you looking for? Are you hoping to actually get a fact? Are you hoping to actually get like historical context, get historical knowledge, and you're looking for names, dates, places, laws, you know, inventions, those kind of things. In those ways, sure, you're looking for facts. Other ways, you might be looking for the context, and can I tell the vibes that this person was giving off, their view of other people and the world based on their writing. Now, I think that both are true, and it depends on what you're looking for. I do understand what he's saying, and that you should really be reading to understand the, you know, the frame of mind that the person, the writer, is coming from, and to tell you things. Sure, if I'm reading a fantasy novel, I don't necessarily give a shit about specific facts. I give a shit about how they write women, how they write queer people, how they write people with disabilities, if they even write those, you know, groups of people. If I'm reading a nonfiction, I might be looking for facts. Like I just finished reading Empire of Normality, which is on capitalism and neurodivergence. I'm looking for facts. I'm looking for, you know, what's the historical context here? How did we get to where we are? So I think this one, like all of them, it really depends on what the point of your reading is. Sometimes you want context. Sometimes you're reading for facts. Let me add a caveat there, because none of these are super clear, super easy to answer. When I'm reading a book that I'm looking for facts, it's also very telling about the facts that they include and the ones that they don't. So I think in that case, yes, you should be looking for the deeper context of the person that you're reading from. Again, with Empire of Normality, the author says at the beginning, hey, I'm a white man with neurodivergence raised in the UK. And this is the frame of reference that I am bringing. I know that it is deeply embedded in imperialism, colonialism, racism, all of those things. I know that. I'm trying to acknowledge that as I'm writing. Therefore, my viewpoint is very limited, and I don't want that to take away from the bigger conversation. I'm just hoping to add to the conversation. Please negate what I'm saying. Please contradict me. Please add your own input. That's important. For authors that write something and never acknowledge that, and very clearly have a viewpoint of their access to things or their level of privilege or abilities or whatever, I think it's important that people acknowledge that. And when they don't acknowledge that and they post things with a bunch of opinions, the next one is, when great readers read, they ask themselves a simple question: what do I plan to do with this information? I don't think it's that deep all the time. I don't think it needs to be that deep, and I don't think that doesn't make you a great reader. I think you can be an excellent reader, whatever that means. I think you can be a great reader, again, whatever that means to you, and not give a shit about every single thing that you read and not take it super to heart and not necessarily think about it the next day. Like, I think it's perfectly fine if you're absorbing something to help you get through, you know, a shitty situation, and it's okay if you don't remember any of it when you come out of that because you just needed something to help you survive. I think that's just as okay as the person that really wants to absorb the content and remember it and be able to regurgitate it later. I think, again, that this one is subjective, and I don't think that not giving a shit or not trying to like obsessively get something out of everything you're reading, I don't think that that doesn't make you a great reader. I think we need to stop putting value judgments on what type of reader we are and just accept that we're readers. This next one I agree with, kind of. This one is, in every book you read, try to find your next one in its footnotes or bibliography. If I'm reading nonfiction, hell yes, I'm doing this. I love footnotes. I love a bibliography. I love sources. Tell me where you found the thing that you're saying. Tell me what research or statistics or whatever backs up the claim that you are making, because I want to then go read that thing. Part of my job is reading through research and reading through statistics and determining if the way that it's being presented is accurate given what the original author was trying to say. I had a conversation with my supervisor about this earlier. We were reading through a document, and as we were rereading this one line, we were like, what? We were trying to understand what the hell the original author was trying to say with this source that they had and how they typed it up. So what did I do? I looked at the footnotes, I found the original source, I went to the original source, read what the source said, and then read it out to my supervisor and was like, we need to delete that because that is not accurate at all. That is twisted how they wrote it. That actually is kind of reinforcing racist stereotypes, whether intentionally or not, and that's not at all what the original article was trying to say. So let's get rid of that. Yes, for me, for nonfiction, I would 100% agree with this. It does sound like he's really pushing for people to read more nonfiction than fiction in a lot of what he's saying, because a lot of these things, at least for me, apply more to nonfiction than fiction. There's not going to be a bibliography in the back of every fiction book. I don't know that I've ever read one that necessarily had a bibliography in the back. So I think he's specifically looking at this for nonfiction, in which case I would say, yeah, if it's a topic you're trying to learn more about, it's definitely helpful if they cite their sources and you can go to those sources and learn more. I would say that's super helpful. But for fiction, no. The next one, yes and no. It says, when you find an author you love, read all the books that they've written. Yes and no. I would say that, you know, it's definitely a fun thing to do, to pick an author and try to read through their entire catalog. I have a lot of authors that I'm trying to do that. I have a spreadsheet where I'm keeping track of them. Right now, I'm working on doing that for 2 authors actively. I'm trying to read through everything Octavia Butler ever wrote, and then I'm also trying to read through a lot of James Baldwin's works. But they're both people that were very prolific writers, and it's gonna take a long time, but I think that's a fun thing, and I enjoy their content and their writing, and it's something that I want to do. There's other authors where I like that book, I don't give a shit what else they wrote because I just like that thing. It doesn't mean that I want to go read everything they've written. I've also tried doing this with some authors and their backlog sucks. You know, you can see how they get better as an author. So if he's saying to do that to see how the author has progressed and like support them, sure, that can be a lot of fun, but I would also pull back the earlier ones about DNFing books and recognizing that you might like newer books from an author and hate their earlier stuff as they were trying to determine what kind of writer that they were and the types of things that they like to write. So again, yes and no with this one. This next one, no, I don't agree with at all. It says, if you see a book you want, buy it. Don't worry about the price. Reading is not a luxury. Yes, it is. Historically, like we talked about earlier, certain groups of people, particularly African American and African people, were not allowed to read. They were not allowed to learn to read. And so reading is 1,000,000,000% a luxury. It is 1,000,000,000% a luxury to have the access to libraries, to have access to bookstores, to have access to physical books in general, to have access to digital books or audiobooks if you're someone that needs to use audiobooks for whatever reason or just enjoys using audiobooks. I think everything around reading is 1,000,000,000% a luxury. And this idea that you shouldn't consider the price is ridiculous and so privileged. Oh my God. What do you mean, my guy? Especially right now, the price of books is nuts, and people can barely afford their medications, food, safe housing, jobs, gas to get places, bus passes. What are you talking about, my guy? So I disagree with this on every freaking on every level, on every possible level of this one. Absolutely not. I'm going to link some articles down below about the history of reading and oppression so that people can hopefully educate themselves. If you have this viewpoint, you're wrong. You're just wrong. Reading is absolutely a luxury. Access to books is absolutely a luxury. There are definitely parts of the world where you are not allowed to read specific things. They're trying to do that in the United States. They're trying to prevent people from reading things. What do you mean? What do you mean reading is not a luxury? That's crazy. The next one is that speed reading is a scam. You have to spend a lot of time reading. I think it depends on what we would consider speed reading. There are definitely people that in my life that consider me a speed reader because of how much I read. I'm not a speed reader. I know that I read fast, but I'm not a speed reader. I just have this as my main hobby, and so I consume a lot of books. I spend a lot of time reading. So I think his second part of that sentence that says you just have to spend a lot of time reading, yeah, I would agree. If reading is the thing you want to do, you just need to spend a lot of time doing it, and then you'll end up, potentially consuming more books. But even if you're reading the fastest that you're capable of reading, and you're only able to finish one book or a half a book a month or whatever, that again, that doesn't matter. Speed of reading doesn't really matter. Who cares? If you're someone that is a skim reader and that's how you absorb content and you enjoy doing it that way, and that's what works for you, that's cool. I don't really care. I think people that are like, oh, I read 700 books that year. Okay, maybe I'm questioning a little bit if you actually flipped through the whole book. But I know that there are people that are like, oh, I read 200 plus books. And also that's their job. So yeah, they're going to read a lot of books. They're going to read more than me that has a 9-to-5. They're going to read more than the person that has multiple jobs and family members to take care of. Like, yeah, that's just how it works. So I think on a certain level, sure, we can say that people that are reading hundreds and hundreds of books per year while also having a 9-to-5 or, having any kind of other thing going on. Maybe I don't necessarily think that you're actually absorbing the content that you're reading on any level, even like a surface level. Again, I think reading speed is subjective, and so if you consider yourself a speed reader and it's because you finish 3 books a week, cool. Love that for you. Do what works for you. I don't really care. I'm not trying to make value judgments on how much you read or don't read. Except for the people that have read like 400 books a year. I don't believe it. The next one is your aim as a reader is to understand why something happened. The what is secondary. Before I start a book, fiction especially, I almost always find a summary to get a sense of the plot and core themes. It saves me from spending half the book in the dark trying to figure out what's going on. I don't think it's that specific for a lot of people. And a lot of times, especially like at least recently, it's really seemed like it. Reading the back of the book or even reading introductions and stuff can spoil you for the whole freaking book. I don't want that. I don't know a lot of people that do want that. Unless you're looking for like content warnings, then I want you to spoil me for things because I'm trying to mentally prepare myself to read something that's horrific and it's going to activate my PTSD. But I think my aim as a reader is to have a good time. I often go into books with no idea of what they're about because I just want to have a good time. Sometimes I will read the back because I want to know a little bit more. Like I have a book that I just got for Christmas. It's like Build a Nest in Your Body or something like that. All I had to do was read on the back that it's about shapeshifters. And I was like, hell yeah, I'm in. I don't care what the rest of the book is about until I read it and see if I enjoy it. I think it depends. If you're someone that does like to do kind of a little bit deeper of a dive before you pick up a book and like read the back or read reviews from other people, sure, I think that's totally valid. And if that fits how you read and why you read and what you read, then that's perfectly cool. But if you're also someone like me that doesn't really give a shit and just wants to have a good time, I think it's also okay if you do that as well. I think that telling people what their aim is as a reader doesn't really work for me. I think it depends on the person, the context, the book, what they're experiencing in their life, why they picked it up, all of those things. Your nightstand should be ambitious. Don't just build a library, build an anti-library, a stack of unread books that humbles you and reminds you just how much there still is to learn. Now, I kind of agree with this for my own personal nightstand. because I do have books on my nightstand that I haven't read, but I'd like to read. But they've also been there for 2 or 3 years and are kind of dusty, and I just don't touch them because they're like perfectly perched in between my bookends, and they're just kind of what my nightstand looks like. The books that I'm actually actively reading are actually in front of that in a pile, and that changes constantly. I like the idea of having a nightstand where you do have books that you're like hoping to get to next, and showing like things that you also just really enjoyed, like having books on your nightstand. But again, I'm gonna pull my social work bullshit and say that having a nightstand is a luxury, and having a place to safely store books is a luxury. And therefore, if you don't have a nightstand or you don't have physical books for your nightstand, it doesn't mean that you're not an active reader. It doesn't mean that you're not constantly trying to learn or read more. I think if you have a nightstand and you enjoy having books on it, cool, I love that for you. I do that. But if you don't have that, or can't, or won't, or whatever, I don't think that is indicative at all of what type of reader you are. The next one I kind of agree with, but I don't like how it's written. The next one is read like a spy in the enemy's camp. Wisdom is wisdom. Take it from wherever it comes, and you should read books and writers you disagree with. I agree with the part of you should read books from writers or from points of view that you might disagree with or that challenge. Let's reframe it. Read things from people that challenge your worldview. I think that's a better way to reframe that. If I'm going to read a book and I'm going to spend my time reading something, I'm not going to read from someone that doesn't care about my bodily autonomy or will not fight for my rights as a woman or a queer person. No, I'm not going to waste my time and my mental energy reading from specific people that I don't agree with. I cut those people out of my life from my family. I'm not about to let strangers into my brain and into my personal space and absorb their bullshit. Why would I do that? I'm not going to do that. Now, reading books that challenge your worldview, 1,000,000,000%. I don't know shit about Palestine. I wasn't taught anything about Palestine in school. I sure shit wasn't taught anything about Palestine from my parents or my family. So yes, I am reading books about Palestine and what's happening. I wasn't really taught shit about the ins and outs of what really led up to the Holocaust and the specific things that were happening. But I took a course and ended up reading books about genocide and the history of genocides, things that you're not taught in the public school system in the United States, and that my parents sure as shit weren't teaching me. Right now, I'm reading a lot about civil rights and Black feminism and all kinds of things. I'm reading a lot from James Baldwin and commentary on his life. Again, not things I was taught in school, certainly not things that my racist dad would have ever exposed me to. So I think that yes, if you're reading things that challenge your worldview, I think that is important. It doesn't have to be every book you read. A fantasy about dragons is not going to challenge my worldview necessarily. It might, you never know. But I think if you're going to read nonfiction, it can be helpful to pick books that are going to challenge your worldview and not just kind of continue to feed the things that you already know and think about the world. I think it's important to expand on that a little bit. So I would agree with this to an extent, but please stop with this like comparing everything to war. I hate that. Can we stop doing that? The next one I think is very privileged. It says, if you only find yourself underlining and agreeing with the authors you read, you're not reading diversely or critically enough. You should be arguing with the authors you read. You should know enough about the topic to spot where they are wrong too. Now, I agree with this to an extent. I think it's important to have kind of a foundational understanding of the types of things that you're reading in order to, spot areas where there are gaps in that writer's knowledge, where they're writing things that you're like, ooh, I know that's not true. You are lying. Things that you're like, ooh, okay, I see why you got published. You clearly have a narrative that you're selling, and I know that that's inaccurate. But I also think it takes a while to get there for a lot of the times, especially if it's a topic you're learning about for the first time. When I'm reading, I'll use Empire of Normality just because I just finished it today. But there are things in that book that I was like, okay, I didn't know that. I'm literally reading that for the first time. So why would I disagree with that person? If I'm learning something that I have never been exposed to, I have no idea, I'm, potentially going to accept what they're saying and use it as a jumping off point to learn more about the thing that they're talking about. Versus potentially other things where, it didn't necessarily happen in this book. My leg is falling asleep. It didn't necessarily happen in this book, but that author was writing about history of psychology and kind of social worky stuff. And as a social worker with a psychology degree as well, I was kind of ready to be like, But I didn't encounter anything in that book that I was like, no, that's inaccurate, or a weird way of rephrasing what really happened or anything like that. So I will say that I agree with this on face value, that if you are only, this goes back to a previous one, if you're only reading from people that you agree with, and you're only reading with stuff that reinforces your worldview, you're maybe not expanding your brain as much as you could be. But if that shit that's comforting to you, and you're not in a place where you're emotionally ready to challenge yourself, or, you know, take on the stressors of other people's experience because you're still just trying to survive, fine. I mean, do what you have to do. I don't think it needs to necessarily be that serious all the time. I do hope that at some point, everyone can get to the point where they're willing to read from other people's perspectives and challenge their worldview, but also know that that comes with like a lot of emotional baggage. And some people do not have the ability to take on more. They don't have access to the then resources they might need if they find that their worldview has been like completely flipped upside down. You know, if you don't have access to mental health resources or a doctor, like that can be a really scary thing. And maybe that's not, you know, a good idea for you to do right now. I've definitely encountered books, nonfiction books that like my therapist has recommended me, that if I wasn't in therapy, I never would have picked up that book because, oh my God, that would have kind of destroyed me as a human. So having that therapeutic base really helped. There's kind of like this rolling theme with a lot of these where it's completely subjective. It depends on your access to things. I agree with this to an extent, but I do think it's kind of a privilege thing. The next one is, don't be satisfied just getting the gist of things. He says that you should really try to dig deep into a topic. Like, don't just read for surface level. I would say yes and no. If it's a topic that you're really enjoying, something you really want to deep dive in, then definitely read, you know, from people that write about it, people that have written about those people that have experienced it, and kind of get a general idea of the area within that topic that you really want to deep dive in. You know, I read that book that I mentioned earlier about dinosaurs. I'm not deep diving my ass into dinosaur history as much as I love dinosaurs. I was just reading that to get a general vibe of the dinosaurs from this dinosaur book that I was reading. I read a book from someone that studies volcanoes for a living. I thought that was a really cool book. Am I doing a deep dive in volcanology or whatever it's called? No, I was just reading to get a cool book about volcanoes at the time. I think you don't need to do a deep dive in every topic. I think it's important to read a variety of topics and determine which ones you do want to do a deep dive in, but you don't necessarily have to do that all the time. I think it's, again, subjective. It depends on what you're hoping to gain from what you're reading. The next one I do agree with, and this is, good things happen in bookstores. And he says, so many of my favorite books are just random things I grabbed at bookstores. That's what bookstores are for, what I've tried to build mine around. It's a discovery engine better than any algorithm. Yeah, bookstores are great. If you have access to bookstores, I think that's an incredible thing, and I think you should absolutely spend your time there. Same thing with libraries. If you have access to libraries and you can safely get there, absolutely, I think you should spend your time in libraries or in bookstores. I think for readers, it tends to be a very comforting experience. I know myself and a lot of other readers, we don't necessarily need to buy books. We just want to be around people that are around books. So like being in a bookstore and just like sitting down and reading, I don't need to buy anything. I just want to be in my safe space of like surrounded by books. I think that's an amazing experience. I've had such good conversations with librarians and booksellers and other people buying books, and my husband in cafes that are in bookstores. I think that it can be such a comforting, lovely place where you can really learn a lot and kind of discover yourself. But again, not everyone has that. Not everyone has libraries that they can, well, not libraries that exist in their community, access to get to the library and then get safely back home. Bookstores in their community, a way to physically get to the bookstore, a way to physically get inside of the bookstore if it's not set up for people with disabilities. I think if you have access to bookstores, you have the ability to get there, and it's something that you enjoy, you should absolutely do it and spend more time there if you have the ability to. Caveat, caveat, caveat. Prefaces and forewords are there for a reason. Don't skip them. They often have a ton of helpful and interesting stuff about the context around when the person was writing, who the work ended up influencing, and other tidbits that sometimes stick with you longer than even the work itself. Yes and no. Similar to what I was saying earlier about reading the back of the book, introductions are horrible for spoiling you for books. Oh my God. I can't tell you how many books have been spoiled because I've read an introduction. No, you know, these beginning sections of books, I agree, offer a ton of context. And oftentimes what you'll find is that someone will republish a book years later, particularly nonfiction I'm thinking of, and add a new preface or a new introduction or a new foreword or whatever, and give you more context and tell you what they've changed. Yes, I think that's important, and I think it's important that you read those. But do you need to do it every time? No, not necessarily. I am reading Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire, and the introduction is 30 pages and is long as shit. Right now, my focus is on getting the original content of the book itself read. Once I have that content read, then I'm more likely to go back and read the introduction for additional context and to help explain things that I may have missed along the way. But sometimes I get so lost in the fact that an introduction is 45 pages that I put the book down and never get to the actual content. Or it can completely spoil it because they're giving you like a full analysis of the content. And I don't want that. I will come back to it and read it later. So I think, yes, the introduction and end pieces of books can be extremely valuable and provide you more context and more nuance and further reading and all of that. I agree with that, but I don't think that you should necessarily feel pressured to consume those things at any specific time while you're reading. Like, I don't think you should feel like you have to read all of the beginning pieces before you get into the meat of the book, because sometimes that can ruin your experience. Yes, those things are very important. I agree with what he's saying. I would just add my little caveat that if you want to read the introduction after you finish the book, that's cool too. The next one I agree with. The next one is, if a book is really good, recommend it and pass it along to other people. Absolutely. If there's a book that you enjoy, please tell me. If there's a book that you hate, please tell me. If there's a book that I've ever mentioned on my channel that you've been like, oh my God, I've read that and that's shit, don't waste your time, please tell me. I want to know. I have some of my best conversations with people when we're talking about books. That's something that my husband does with me all the time. He listens to a lot of podcasts. I don't really listen to a ton of podcasts. And the podcasts that he listens to, they will often reference books, and he'll be like, ooh, have you heard of that? Have you read that? What's the context? And then he sometimes will then go read those books. It's how he read Project Hail Mary and the Murderbot Diaries series. And then because of him, I'm reading Dungeon Crawler Carl. So having conversations about books can be such a lovely thing. You can learn so much, and it's such a good way to bond with people. I would definitely say that if you really enjoy a book, you should absolutely talk it up. Talk to other people if it's something you're comfortable doing. There are books that are very, very personal, and you may not actually want to open up that can of worms with someone if they're not necessarily a safe person, you're not ready to talk about it, blah, blah, blah. There are lots of books that I've read for therapy that I'm like, I don't want to talk to other people about that because that was very personal and tragic and horrific and traumatic shit that I went through while reading that. And it's not necessarily something I want to talk about with the next person, but I will yap about Frankenstein all day long. So I think it depends on the book and on your ability and comfort level with talking about the book. That was the last one, and I think that's a pretty strong one to end with. Again, I think reading is such a subjective thing. There's really only a couple that I'm like, oh my God, no, my guy. Things that he said that I'm like, no, it is absolutely obvious that, I mean, I don't know him at all. I can only look at his photo and judge him from his photo, and the way that he presents in his photo is as a white man, and it seems like he's a pretty successful white man, and love that for him. I'm not saying that he didn't work his ass off for what he has. Maybe he did. I don't know anything about him. But a white man that has access to money telling me that reading is not a luxury, I'm not gonna agree with as a social worker. I'm absolutely not gonna agree with. I don't necessarily agree with what he's saying in terms of how it could apply generally. For him, absolutely, he can read and, he can damage his books. He can do whatever he wants to his books. 100%. That is his right. They are his books. I just wish that there was some context given of him recognizing that this is a very, very privileged thing. I absolutely find this incredibly fascinating. I'm so happy that Dee Dee did this so that I could watch her video and then rage about some of these myself. If you want to read through this list and leave a comment down below of any that you agree or disagree with, if you make a video where you talk about it as well, please let me know. I will have his website link for this blog post posted down below, along with some further reading on the history of reading and access to reading, in case you want to know more. Thank you so much for watching. I will catch you guys in the next one. Bye.